Success can take many forms, but most importantly, it can be a positive and uplifting story. This is Success in Iowa. Today on Success in Iowa, we meet Emmy award-winning voiceover artist Bo Barker. Bo has been heard on movie trailers, national commercials, public television, and Iowa State fans may know him as the voice of the football promotional videos and introductions. And he's doing it all out of a rural farmhouse in Palo Alto County. Let's learn more.
Massey Zod, an impressively large collection of semi and classic designs, suits, jackets, and superfine tuxedos made by perfectionist tailors. The sun sets over the soul of Los Angeles. The sky darkens. Buildings empty. As the day ends and evening begins. Enough with the fads. Let's try something new this year. Introducing the new Grand Mac and Mac Jr.
You are located in Palo Alto County, out in the country, yet you are doing some really big-time stuff with your voice. How did all of this come about?
Wow. Well, the abbreviated version of it, I've always used my voice, just everything from school drama to competitive speech and leadership activities. Always had an interest, not so much in, say, radio, because everybody always says you're going to go into radio. But the guys that really caught my attention were, as a child, it was the distinct voices on television, the actors and the people like Orson Welles, Mason Adams, who was the voice of Smuckers for so many years, female voices like Colleen Dewhurst, just unique, different types of voices always grabbed my ear. And as I got older and into the different school activities, I just became a student of voice. Thought about radio, wanted to make it in radio, was actually encouraged and warded off at the same time by the local guys at the station I did PSAs for, public service announcements. And it was just always in the back of my head, Todd. Some severe life changes and challenges and things kind of put me in a position decades later at the age of 39 to actually quit dabbling and doing just stuff for nonprofits and ministries and such and PSAs, and to start to forge what I call Bo Barker voiceovers. But I am in rural Iowa, so I started here not in Chicago, New York, or Los Angeles, but from, to be honest, a dining room computer and a computer and a basic setup in my dining room of a 100 plus year old farmhouse here in Palo Alto County.
That's exciting that this type of work can be done in that setting and in that location, and technology has advanced to the point to where I know just before you and I began talking, you had a session that you were able to do strictly online. They could monitor exactly what you were doing. It's basically the same as sitting inside of their studio.
Well, and if you have the proper connections, yes. Obviously, if it weren't for the internet, I would have never been able to make my initial forays back in actually 2007, if I correct myself. And they were pretty crude, pretty basic, okay? I don't want to give anyone the impression that I was tied in and doing big jobs, big gigs right away. It's like any industry, Todd. You have to pay your dues and make connections and network and work out the kinks, right? Luckily, I had a technical background. I've worked around the broadcast business, selling equipment and software to radio station owners and staff over a 14-state area at one point in the past. But beyond that, I'd also, set up computer networks, computer systems, informational systems for businesses. So I brought that skill set, also brought the fact that I had many years of speaking professionally, both in my sales and marketing and public relations related, activities for my professional job. I'd been a regional sales manager for the Better Business Bureau for a time and was routinely speaking in front of groups. So I was very comfortable using my voice, but I had to learn that voiceover is a different cat. And here in Northwest Iowa, and actually through most of the, what you would call the Midwest or the rural areas, it's not like I had the ability to tie into a lot of, say, production studios or people entrenched in the traditional voiceover community. So really had to forge my own path, tripped up a lot, to be honest. But bringing the skills that I did have and being open to learning other skills allowed me to get started. And it's been a winding road for me. It's obviously been 13 going on 14 years now since I officially started in walking into voiceover, but it doesn't happen overnight. So it's not just a matter of a microphone and a computer. You have to bring other skills to it. But yeah, isn't it pretty cool that just having that infrastructure and having a suitable internet connection and knowing what to do has allowed me to stretch out and to connect with people and clients in all the major media markets and agencies and all over the world. I've done a lot of work for people around the globe, right from this farmhouse in rural Northwest Iowa.
You talked about some of the names that impressed you when you were young. Who are some of the voices that impress you now that you have worked with?
Well, I think as I stepped into voiceover, or more actively did, and I should state, and this is a little bit of a sideline, a side track thought, but it applies to anybody who's listening today that has a dream or an ambition. I had this deep seated thing about voiceover. I wanted to be a promo guy. I wanted to be the guy that you would hear say, today's country hits 107.7, something like that. I really didn't want to be an on air guy, but I never knew how to get into that position. I just would hear the voices on different radio stations, from having been in the broadcast business, that I didn't know if those people were local. I didn't know where they were from. But there was a guy who's a very well-known, we call it imaging in the broadcast business, a very well-known voice by the name of Joe Kelly, who I later found out was the voice on KGGO in Des Moines, but he also did the same type of work for, at the time in the 90s, dozens of stations around the country. And that was a voice that always resonated with me. Big, resonant, imaging voice that had that message to brand and position radio stations. Mostly for Joe, he did classic rock and that type of format. That's a voice that I'm fortunate to say I'm actually, on social media, we're friends and we've interacted. And it was just kind of neat because it was a touchstone to connect with him. As far as today's voices, a lot of it, even today in voiceover, everybody, I shouldn't say everybody and generalize, but so many of us identify voiceover as the big voice, the voice we used to hear in the movie theater. And at the time I stepped into voiceover, I knew who Don LaFontaine was by his voice. I really didn't know about him and his story outside of his copious work. And the other movie trailer voices that influenced me. Hal Douglas was right up there with Don. Both of those gentlemen have passed away some time ago, but they remain as influences. A gentleman up in Minneapolis, I always heard his voice announcing on Fox Sports, Dick Irvesty. He was out in LA, but came back to the Midwest, in fact, and is semi-retired and up in the Midwest. These are voices that I always heard, but never really knew the people behind them. And then as I stepped into voiceover in 2007, again, it was during a challenging time of my life. It's a long story in and of itself. But life circumstances got pretty bad, pretty tough. And I was forced to walk away from my fledgling efforts from 2007. And for about almost 3 years, for almost 4 years, really couldn't do anything. Had to lay it all down, all the progress I had made from 2007 to 2008. So it was about 3.5 years sabbatical, as I call it. But as I came out of it, and I won't go into this story, we'll save it for another episode. I was very fortunate to connect with a lady by the name of Randy Thomas. That is her name, her actual name. Randy's the voice of the Academy Awards more than any other announcer in their history. Up until this year with COVID, she's announced the Tonys every year for about 20 years, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Kennedy Center honors. I was very fortunate to connect via a simple email originally with Randy, and she has become a dear friend and a mentor and helped me, keep my focus in the years since about 2011 when we connected. That's a voice that most people would have heard, even if they don't know who she is. But as far as broadcast is concerned, I'm not connected with Howard Stern or any of the big radio people, because that's in a whole different genre, in a different lane than voiceover. Voiceover is not radio. We're heard on the radio, but more of what we do is commercial narration, commercial work, narration work, audiobooks, training videos for mom and pa that need, a small business here right in the Midwest that might need a voice to help position themselves. So we use our voice. We sound like radio people oftentimes, and sometimes we are former radio people, But large in a way, most of the a good, at least a good share of the very successful voice actors today really don't come from traditional broadcast, Todd.
No, that is true, and it's a little bit of a misnomer that someone can think that it just translates directly over. There are a lot of radio people and television people that have been very successful in just doing voiceover work. However, it's not a direct transfer.
True.
It's a different game. It's a different delivery. There's a lot of nuances that almost like a different foundation, if you will.
Very much so. And in fact, I'm fortunate over the years. I've been represented by several well-respected regional talent agencies, as well as now I'm represented with an agency that operates in all of what we call the big three: New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. And over the recent years, yes, there are always certain scripts that come and call for a bigger voice, a voice that has gravitas and a voice that has presence. But to be honest, the majority of the specs we get, even today, sometimes bold lettering and underlines say no announcer. Voiceover, to use an analogy, and again, I'm not in any way disparaging radio because so many of my friends are, and some are still are in radio, and I've always had great respect, especially for small town local radio. But radio in itself, an approach, is very much like talking to a crowd of thousands, maybe a million listeners, oftentimes in big markets. Where voiceover, you approach it as if though you're having a one-on-one conversation. That's really the easiest way to sum up the difference in the way we approach. When people are listening to radio, often they're in their cars. They're a little bit distracted. Sometimes they're not actively listening many times. So sometimes the approach that in broadcast we had to hone was I had to reach out and get your attention to that radio. I have to, grab your ear. We don't necessarily do that in voiceover because oftentimes, especially with video work or television work or cable broadcast spots, our voiceover work is actually accompanying, say, visual images, where obviously with radio, you don't have that. So that's part of the reason it's an entirely different approach. But it's pretty funny when I get scripts that flat out say no announcer, because they know my agents, for example, they know that I don't sound like the millennial 20-year-old, which is oftentimes in demand today, and a voice that you will hear on lots and lots of national commercial spots. I know that that's just not my wheelhouse. So my voice, my presentation is the gravitas, is the older, even though I'm not as old as I sound, the more mature, heavier, not total, heavy-handed authority, but sort of the velvet fist. That's sort of where I found my niche. Yes.
I did steal a quote off of your website that I thought it painted a great word picture that someone used to describe you. That said, Bo has the voice of an iron worker recounting the time he saved a kitten from disaster. That paints a picture in your mind. And
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
as people have been listening to you now, I'm sure that they can relate to that. Yeah, that's it. That's him.
Yeah, that was a beautiful quote from a good friend, a former agent of mine who is very successful in the audio production realm up in Minneapolis. Yeah, and Jerry Horwath, who did that. And yeah, it was amazing. And I asked his permission to use that because it summed it up. I think the key thing, Todd, in voiceover, and really this applies to anything people are doing, authenticity, being genuine, being who and what you are. Yes, I obviously, and anyone who gets on a mic sometimes gets into the play of it, and you hear us, beef up our voice, and that thing. I have to be careful. I'll just say it in my voice. If I do that, I can get scary, and that's not my goal. I'm not trying to scare people, but I also know that my voice doesn't fit for everything. So it's just like in any business people start. Know your strengths, know where you resonate, where you can best serve clients. Just my clients happen to be production houses and ad agencies and talent agencies and independent business owners that hire me to help them with their media projects. But know what you do and know what you do well and know what you need to shore up. And if you're authentic and you're real and you're true to yourself and not trying to be something that you're really not, then you're going to find success.
He is Bo Barker, doing some great voiceover work out of a very rural farmhouse in Palo Alto County in Northwest Iowa. Bo, thank you very much for your time. I know that you're a busy man out of there, and I do very much appreciate it. And continued success to you, sir.
Thank you, my friend, and we'll look forward to seeing what success we all have, hopefully in 2021.